It's the Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. Good morning, everyone. We are live at the Greene Space today, our ground floor theater here at WNYC. Audience, thank you so much for turning out. It's a good thing that this wasn't scheduled for yesterday because none of you would have showed up. And listeners, when we're in the Greene Space, you can watch the show as well as listen. We have live streaming video at WNYC.org right on the homepage, or if you prefer, you can use the station's Facebook page, the WNYC Facebook page. So tune in and watch or tune in and listen. Some headlines this morning. Syria blocks chemical weapons inspectors from entering the attacked town of Douma. What are they trying to hide? Trump and Hannity try to block federal court from seeing their communications with Michael Cohen. What are they trying to hide? And Trump contradicts UN Ambassador Nikki Haley on new sanctions against Russia following its complicity with Syria's likely war crime. On CBS Face the Nation, Haley said this.
Sanctions will be coming down. Secretary Mnuchin will be announcing those on Monday if he hasn't already, and they will go directly to any sort of companies that were dealing with equipment related to Assad and chemical weapons use.
But the White House did not impose those sanctions. New York Times headline, Trump scraps new sanctions against Russia, overruling advisors. And that's where we'll start in the Greene Space today. With all of that and our first special guest, AP White House correspondent Jonathan Lemire, who is here on the Greene Space stage. Hi, Jonathan. Thanks so much for taking the time, and welcome back to WNYC.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You report on Trump and his allies hitting a new level of anxiety after the raid on Michael Cohen's office, a higher level even than over the Russia investigation?
It seems to be going that way. The people that we have spoken to, both inside and outside of the White House, believe that there's a degree of exposure here, potential exposure here, for the president, his inner circle, his adult children, who all worked at the Trump organization, perhaps even more than the Russia probe. Remember, of course, the president has steadfastly denied any wrongdoing there, any collusion with Russia, and that, here, with this raid on Michael Cohen, they feel like things could be unearthed that could be potentially very damaging. And I think it's reflective. We need to remember who Michael Cohen is. Michael Cohen is his attorney for more than a decade, but he was way more than just a lawyer. He was, as SNL put it, he was a lawyer-ish. He was far more of a fixer. He made bad stories go away. He would be the one to handle, alleged payouts to Stormy Daniels and her ilk. He would be often part of the deal-making process, or at least exploring deals in sort of shadowy foreign capitals for the Trump organization. He is someone who knows where the bodies are buried, and I think there's people in the Trump world who are nervous that those bodies could get unearthed.
And listeners, if you want to call in with any question for AP White House correspondent Jonathan Lemire, it's not every day we have a White House correspondent here in the Greene Space. So listeners, audience members right here live in the Greene Space, feel free to raise your hands and we'll come around with a microphone. And folks listening on the radio, as always, 212-433-WNYC, 212-433-9692. One of the headlines on one of your articles on the AP site right now, what's in those seized documents? Trump's biggest new worry. What kinds of documents are they? As far as you can report, that they seized from Michael Cohen?
Files and records and electronic devices, it's unclear. And this is sort of a lot of what happened in court yesterday, was the debate on whether or not the president and his legal team would get an early look at these. And the judge has sort of hinted that that would not be the case, that she might appoint some sort of special master who would sift through the materials first, and there are quite a bit, deciding whether or not any of it legal privilege would apply to them. The president's team obviously is trying to keep as much of that out of court as possible.
It would seem kind of nonsensical. They went to court and made a case, but were they really asking to have, the people who are being investigated, Cohen and anybody who might have had communications with, that they would have the right to decide which documents were attorney-client privileged rather than the court deciding?
Well, I think that's why the court was rather skeptical of that claim, and I don't think it's going to go that way. Certainly, though, the headlines, it was a circus yesterday at court. I wasn't myself personally there, but certainly my colleagues were. And, not only did we get a Stormy Daniels cameo, Elliot Spitzer walked by at some point because every tabloid character in New York needed to be there.
Was that a coincidence? Was he on his way to his dentist, or what was it?
There are undoubtedly Elliot Spitzer, Stormy Daniels jokes to make that I will not at this time. We do believe it was a coincidence. And then, of course, we have the big reveal that Michael Cohen's mysterious third client was Sean Hannity, a moment that literally gasps came out in the courtroom when that was announced.
Right. Why did Hannity's name need to be made public as the additional person who's in the Cohen documents?
Well, part of it was to defend the idea that Michael Cohen is, in fact, a lawyer. Since in recent years, he's only had 3 clients. The Republican fundraiser, Mr. Brody, I believe his name, who just himself was outed as having given Michael Cohen helped arrange a payment to hush up a paternity case. The president himself, of course. And then he said, well, we also have this third client. And it was sort of pressed, well, you need to reveal this to prove that you are a lawyer. And if you are a lawyer, that you have the ability to claim these sort of privileges. And Cohen's representation really fought that. And then at one moment, even when the judge said, well, we need to know, said, well, we'll give it to you in a sealed envelope. And a point of professional pride, the Associated Press lawyer who was in the courtroom suggested, well, wait a minute, sort of petitioned that shouldn't be the case. This should be public knowledge. And the judge agreed, and it was revealed to be Mr. Hannity.
Let me ask the control room to do us a little favor. We have a clip of Sean Hannity addressing that scheduled for later in the show. Could you pull that up to right now? Let me know when it's ready, and we're going to play that to illustrate what Jonathan was just saying. But it's not a scandal for Hannity, right? As far as we know, he's allowed to consult a lawyer.
That's what he says. Yes, at this point, there's no indication that of any wrongdoing for Sean Hannity. I mean, I think obviously eyebrows were raised. In terms of his public relations, it's maybe not the best look, considering that Michael Cohen has a reputation for perhaps doing somewhat unsavory legal work for his clients. But yes, at this moment, there's no reason to believe that Sean Hannity has done anything wrong, although it will say it's another illustration of just how tight the Trump network is. Sean Hannity is himself not just a Trump cheerleader many times on air, but a confidant of the president. We know they speak frequently, that he gives advice on matters, and Trump seeks out his opinion. So therefore, I guess in some ways, it's not surprising they would also share an attorney.
Here's that Hannity clip.
Michael never represented me in any matter. I never retained him in the traditional sense as retaining a lawyer. I never received an invoice from Michael. I never paid legal fees to Michael, but I have occasionally had brief discussions with him about legal questions about which I wanted his input and perspective. And I assume that those conversations were attorney-client confidential.
So did that answer help or hurt Michael Cohen's argument that he's really a lawyer?
That's a great question. The Cohen's team sort of wanted to use Hannity as an example to say, yes, look, it's great legal work. And Sean obviously sort of backed away from that. Whether what Hannity had in mind is unclear. Why is he distancing himself from Cohen? Is it because he doesn't want people to think, simply assume that Cohen is there to try to set up a hush payment or, to sort of make some negative story go away? That's something Cohen did quite a bit for the president. We know that he helped broker deals with the National Enquirer and other organizations for these catch and kills where they would, buy someone's story, a salacious story, and then, agree that person couldn't tell that story to someone else, but yet they would never run it. They would kill it.
But Hannity did say that nothing he dealt with Cohen about had to do with a third party, and that's right. A very general statement, third party or another party, but the suggestion there is that there wasn't a Stormy Daniels situation. There wasn't a paternity situation like there was for Elliot Brody.
Correct. That's what he says, yes.
Well, we have a Hannity question from a caller, so let's do this now before we move on to other aspects. So, Ryan, where are you? You're in?
Colonia.
In Colonia. Hey, thanks for calling in.
Thank you. So my question was something that I saw in response to the Hannity, we'll call it a bombshell. Hannity was on air saying we should end the investigation because of this raid on Cohen's office. Is there any legal jeopardy for him espousing these statements, even though without saying, by the way, and that was my lawyer?
Well, that's
It seems like there's a conflict of interest. There's at least an ethical question if not perhaps some kind of legal question. Please stop raiding my lawyer. I don't like that, and not disclosing that it was his lawyer.
Right. And Ryan, thank you. It's at least a professional question. I was thinking about this yesterday, Jonathan, with respect to me or you. If I were to go on the air and rail against the illegitimacy of a government raid on an attorney without disclosing that he was my attorney or used him for whatever, I would probably get fired.
Yeah, you wouldn't be hosting the show today.
I don't think so.
Yeah, I think that's right. I don't know if there are necessarily legal implications to it, but it puts a spotlight on Fox News, certainly. It's unclear whether Hannity disclosed to them that Cohen represented him. He certainly didn't indicate that he has. So if he did, then the question is, why would Fox News allow him to go on these rants on air and say these things? Or if he didn't, is he now perhaps, people at Fox News are upset with him and have to question whether or not he should, suffer some sort of consequence or be spoken to about this? I mean, that's unclear. That'll be fascinating to watch in the coming days. He obviously did host his show as usual last night.
And you report that Trump is worried that Cohen might strike a deal to sing to the U.S. Attorney's Office. Now, the common line on Michael Cohen is that he would take a bullet for Donald Trump. He has said something like that in the past. But there's an alternative theory that says for all the loyalty that he has shown to Trump over the years, Trump stiffed him by not giving him a job in the White House when he got elected, which Cohen would have wanted. So faced with the choice of going to prison over whatever it is they may have on him, if he's found guilty of anything, being separated from his wife and kids, behind bars, he has a family, versus cooperating with the U.S. Attorney's Office to reveal something about Trump, he will choose family and freedom over being a martyr for Donald Trump. Do you have a reason to believe that's accurate?
I think that it's a debate that Michael Cohen is going to have. He has certainly declared himself the Ray Donovan of Donald Trump's world, that the loyal fixer, that he is someone who would, as he has said more than once, take a bullet for the now president. That said, in Trump world, people around the president often find that loyalty is sort of a one-way street, and that Mr. Cohen will have to make a decision as to whether or not he wants to, which path does he want to follow? We have seen people get swept up in the legal issues surrounding the president go one of two ways. Paul Manafort, his former campaign chairman, has held out. He's not cooperating. He is pleaded not guilty. He's fighting tooth and nail, leading to some speculation that perhaps he's hoping for a pardon down the road. On the other hand, there's former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn and Manafort's deputy, Rick Gates, who both have agreed to cooperate with prosecutors, and that will, in an effort to alleviate what potentially lengthy prison sentences. Gates in particular is one who has talked about, his lawyer has said, Gates is a really family man. He's petitioned to he's under home confinement right now. He's asked to be able to go on the weekends to go attend his son's Little League game. So clearly family is weighing on him. The issue is, will family have the same weight there? And we've talked to people, our reporting has talked to people who are familiar with Cohen's thinking, who suggest that, it's at least a debate that he is having, that he knows that if he does fight this, and if he ends up being incarcerated, it potentially could be a very lengthy sentence. And
there's nothing you could say at this point about what Cohen might actually have on Trump that would be so scary for Trump?
I mean, the sense of it is, no one can say definitively, but just based on Cohen's track record, what we know he did for the Trump Organization, what he's rumored to do of extracurricular activities for the Trump Organization, that perhaps at minimum there could be some business dealings, some financial issues that at the very least we can safely say prosecutors will be looking at.
Let's take another phone call. Lila in Westchester, you're on WNYC. Hi, Lila.
Hi, good morning. My question is, Michael Cohen has been waving his passport around to prove that he was never in Prague for a meeting, and it's been said that you can go from Germany to Prague without a passport, but you can't go from the United States to Germany or Europe without a passport. And I wondered if I haven't heard anybody mention that they looked at his passport to see if he was in Europe at that time.
Yeah, this is, for people who don't know this part of the story, an interesting piece of intrigue surrounding Michael Cohen. His name comes up in the infamous Steele dossier as having met with a Russian official in Prague to discuss the Trump campaign. He absolutely, flatly, staunchly, vociferously denies it. But the McClatchy News Service reported the other day that I guess, investigators have evidence that he really was in Prague. Why does any of this matter?
Well, I mean, it would matter if it's proven that he was in Prague and talking to a Russian official during the election. That would certainly be a red flag and potentially point to the coordination between the campaign and the Russian officials that prompted that concept prompted the special counsel investigation. Yes, Cohen has repeatedly denied that he did not go to Prague. He sort of infamously tweeted a photo of just his passport cover, as if that proved that he wasn't there, which led to a lot of sort of amusing takes on Twitter. But he then also showed, I believe he produced the passport, I believe to BuzzFeed, who reviewed it and said there was no stamp that he had been in the Czech Republic.
And that's to the caller's question, right? Because you can fly to somewhere else in Europe and then go to Prague without a check.
But people have raised questions like, could he have a second passport? Or could he have exactly that, flown to another European country and traveled by other means, bus, train, whatever, and crossed a border from EU to EU, where therefore you wouldn't get another stamp. That's also possible. Now, I will say, in light of the McClatchy reporting on Friday, that is a report that has not been confirmed by any other news organization, I don't believe, and Cohen has again denied it.
Stormy Daniels' lawyer was on Morning Joe today saying Cohen's lawyer, and maybe Trump's too, threw Hannity under the bus in some way to get Hannity's name revealed, that somehow they didn't have to do that, but they were protecting their own clients in some way by getting Hannity's name to that point. Do you know anything that confirms or refutes that?
I mean, that's not clear. Mr. Avenatti has done Stormy Daniels' lawyer, has done a wonderful job of generating headlines. He is, a story that we wrote for the AP a few weeks back was the idea that he's almost dipped into the Trump playbook, where he's every day got some sort of new angle, some sort of stay tuned, we'll see, building suspense, another reveal. In fact, I believe later today, he's supposed to reveal the sketch of a person who allegedly threatened Miss Daniels in a parking lot, the incident she talked about in her 60 Minutes interview. That sketch is, I believe, coming out later this morning. And, but it's unclear. It's certainly, look, by revealing Hannity's name, I don't know the legal implications necessarily of what that would mean, but at the very least, it generated a day of headlines. It's Sean Hannity who's on the cover of the Daily News and the Post this morning, not Donald Trump. So, if maybe it's a brief deflection, beyond that, it's unclear what that strategy is.
And the judge asked for documents regarding whatever business Hannity had with Michael Cohen. So, in other words, however much Hannity is downplaying his relationship with Cohen, there are some written documents. And again, that doesn't make it illegitimate. It doesn't make it a scandal. But he is downplaying the relationship. But there are written documents. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in this position, right?
Stay tuned.
You report Sarah Huckabee Sanders yesterday tried to put distance between Trump and Cohen.
Right.
That would be a first, I think, given the closeness. It's why people in the Greene Space audience are laughing. All of this professed closeness between Trump and Cohen for so many years, and now she said something like, oh, well, we still have some contact with him some of the time. How did she do that?
Yeah, she's echoing a point that the president himself has suddenly begun making in recent days in the light of the Cohen raid, saying, oh, Michael's just one of my attorneys. I have lots of lawyers. And that's true. He has lots of lawyers. But Michael Cohen is a different case. I mean, this was someone who worked very closely, not just with Donald Trump at the Trump Organization, but Trump's children, too, Don Jr., Eric, and Ivanka. I mean, he is someone who played a very significant role in Trump's world, and the White House's efforts to distance himself from him sound very familiar to when Sean Spicer declared that Paul Manafort was someone who worked on the campaign for a brief time, when, of course, he ran the campaign for months.
We have a Stormy Daniels question critical of her and kind of flipping the legal argument here, I think, from Gary in Queens on line 2. Gary, you're on WNYC. Thank you for calling.
Thank you, Brian. I knew you were going to ask me. I knew you were going to go to me with that intro. Yes, I have two questions. One is, why isn't Stormy and those two other women who approached Trump with a demand for money the same way that Autumn Jackson approached Bill Cosby in 1997, and she was sentenced to 2 years prison for extortion? they were doing the same thing that Ms. Jackson did. Also, Sean Hannity is not a journalist. He's an editorialist. Anything he says on Fox News should not be construed as unbiased. Fox pays him to be biased. In that capacity, he has no legal obligation or ethical obligation to publicly disclose his personal friendships with conservatives any more than Chris Matthews has an obligation to disclose his personal friendships with liberals. And Michael Cohen was his personal friend.
Gary, thank you for both of those questions. I would say in the case of Hannity that for most news organizations, and Fox News will have to make their own judgment on this, but for most news organizations, even an opinion columnist or commentator would need to disclose a relationship with somebody in that particular position who was raided by the government, and he's railing against the raid as being illegitimate. I would imagine if he had some kind of relationship that was professional enough that Cohen is using it to demonstrate that he's really a lawyer with legal clients, that's something that would need to be disclosed under news organization ethics, whether you're a straight reporter or a commentator. As far as Stormy Daniels, it's an interesting question, Jonathan, and I know you're not a lawyer, you're a White House correspondent for the Associated Press, but they paid her hush money. If she asked for hush money, the caller is making the case that that could be seen as her being the aggressor, and therefore it's some kind of extortion.
Right. I mean, I think that is it's a fair question to raise. I mean, it's the mechanics of how that went down, I guess, would be perhaps the whether that would be considered extortion or not. I mean, I'm sure that there are allies of the president who would like to make that case. It is remarkable, at least to this point, that she has, I think, largely in the public view, remained a sympathetic character here, and I think some of that is indeed to her credit and to her attorney's credit, who I think have done a very good job in what is clearly the courtroom of public opinion, has done a very good job of sort of keeping the story going and portraying her on the right side of things.
Even if she was the aggressor in arranging the payment, there's still the fact that Trump had some kind of affair, if in fact it's true, because he still denies it, and there were some kind of legal dealings, which, again, doesn't mean that the Trump people broke the law in that circumstance by paying hush money.
Right. Well, the issue is they broke the law if they used campaign money for the hush money. And that's where that's sort of the overlooked point here, is that was this some sort of campaign finance violation? Did they use campaign money? Did they, or if Cohen used his own personal money, as he said, was he reimbursed in some way by the campaign or the president himself? That is the issue that's being looked at.
Right.
Here.
That would be a campaign finance violation. And if Trump, I guess, lied by saying that he didn't know anything about this payment from Cohen to Daniels, when he really did know about something that was done in an illegal fashion in that it wasn't reported as a campaign expense, then he potentially is legally complicit in that.
That is the argument that Mr. Avenatti certainly makes.
Yeah. Changing topics. What happened between Trump and Nikki Haley in the last 2 days? We played the clip of her saying more sanctions would come by Monday on Russia related to chemical weapons, and Trump apparently overruled her. What happened there?
Well, I think we've heard some conflicting stories on this. There are reports that this was ready to go, that the sanctions were sort of formulated by the Treasury Department, and that indeed, as Nikki Haley said, they were set to go. The version that the Associated Press is reporting today is that a little bit different. The idea that certainly sanctions have been discussed. They are still on the table. They have not been ruled out. The White House says, though, that Ambassador Haley was just a little bit over her skis on this, that she spoke as if it was like a certainty that they were coming, when in fact that is, has still being worked out. Now, let's be clear, the president has a number of times tried to take a softer stance toward Russia than people around him, that he is refused to personally chide Vladimir Putin about the election interference, that he has cast doubt on the claims that Russia was responsible for the election interference. He also, in their now pretty infamous phone call of a few weeks ago, when he was told not to congratulate Putin for his reelection and did anyway, that he also didn't use that moment to go after Putin about this chemical attack of the former spy on British soil. And there are people in the administration. I mean, look, they've levied some pretty hard sanctions on Russia, in recent weeks. There's certainly an aggressive posture among people in the administration, including the new National Security Advisor John Bolton, including the Secretary of State designate, Mike Pompeo, who's going through confirmation hearings now, who have taken a tougher tact, while the president himself always seems to not do that. He says because he feels like he wants to have a better personal relationship with Vladimir Putin. He thinks that's the key to better relations between the two countries.
There's a great quote on this in the Times today from former U.S. Ambassador to Moscow, Stephen Sestanovich. He says, Trump seems to think that if he accepts what his advisors recommend on even days of the month and rejects their recommendations on odd days, the result will be a strategy. By and large, other governments don't know whether to laugh or cry at all this, but in Russia, laughter is getting the upper hand.
Yeah, I think that sounds about right. There's not much ideological consistency with this president, except for with a few exceptions. And certainly right, so much of the foreign policy, and this is something that drives not just people within his own administration a little bit crazy, but certainly in world capitals, the idea that he is so reactionary, that it is so it's about, there's very rarely a long-term plan. It is a moment-to-moment thing. Often, it appears, in reaction to whatever he sees on cable news that day.
Let's take another call. Gary in Manhattan on the Upper West Side. You're on WNYC. Hello.
Good morning, everyone. There's a little background noise because I'm doing the most normal thing imaginable in Manhattan on the Upper West Side, parking my car. I wonder, as a reporter...
We once, by the way, when does alternate side of the street expire, if that's what you're waiting for in your neighborhood today?
I'll be done at 11, but there'll be another shift from 11 to 12:30.
Right. We once did a call-in. Maybe we should do another one, because in so many parts of the city, alternate side expires at 11 a.m. So we once did a call-in from 10:40 to 11 o'clock, just for people sitting in their cars, waiting till it's safe to get out.
Great. That would be so great.
Anyway, go ahead.
In any case, my call, I guess it's sort of a constitutional call. I consider reporters a national institution or mentioned in the Constitution. So much of what goes on passes for normal. I wonder if among reporters you feel the pressure to normalize abnormal behavior, and do you feel a constitutional duty to expose this stuff, man? I'm just amazed at how people talk about the most abnormal things as if they were normal. For instance, contradicting one's ambassador to the UN.
Gary, thank you so much. Well, that is a great question to ask a White House correspondent.
Thanks, Gary. So I think our job is he makes a very good point, that this moment in time, whether it's this administration, but not just this administration, this moment in time is different for people in our line of work. And that, we have our obligation is to the truth. It is to report what we see and convey it as accurately as we possibly can each and every day. I mean, we certainly, it's a cliche, but the Associated Press certainly does believe in the idea of being the rough draft of history, that we try to be as accurate as humanly possible each and every day. But we're also at a time where there's so much misinformation and disinformation, where you can talk to, as just an example, like you can talk to four people who were in a White House meeting and get four very different versions of what just happened. And some of that is, competing agendas in a West Wing that is still filled with rivalries, perhaps not as bad as in the first few months of the administration, but, still not everyone there is on the same page. That's also reflective of a president who changes his mind so frequently, who also has been known to he's very big on telling the audience what it wants to hear. So if he talks to one advisor who's advocating one way, he'll agree with that advisor. And then he'll find another advisor who's advocating the opposite viewpoint, and he'll agree with that advisor. So it is certainly difficult to, at times, synthesize and figure out what is the reality. And it's also a moment where the press, we have become so polarized ourselves, and so has become such a target ourselves. And I covered the Trump campaign too, and night after night, he would point to us in the back of the arena and say, "Look, there they are, the fake news." There they are. And he would encourage people to boo us, and that would happen all the time. And people would be threatening. There were times where Secret Service kind of moved us out early because they were nervous about what could happen. That is certainly, this does seem to be a unique time with challenges, but it's also a great responsibility. It's one that we embrace, and we're trying to do our best.
And the normalization question is such a big one for people in our line of work. I was just talking to my parents about this on the phone last night, that, doing a show where we like to consider all points of view and take all serious points of view seriously, if we have the same kind of tone and the same kind of approach when the things that are at stake aren't just tax policy or even should we go to war in Syria, but democracy itself or truth itself, then it kind of normalizes something that shouldn't be accepted as normal. On the other hand, if we take a much different tone, then we risk being told that we're biased or taking the bait that you were describing that Trump, throws out when he calls the media the enemy of the people at his events and other times. And so it's a really big question.
It is. And I think the best approach is simply to call it like you see it. I mean, I'm proud of the fact that I was one of the bylines on an Associated Press story near the end of the campaign when the president had an event in Washington, D.C., and finally acknowledged that Barack Obama was born in the United States. He then tried to blame Hillary Clinton for starting the birtherism movement. And then, our lead was something along the lines of, that we called it a racist lie. And I think that is factually true. And that's what we do. We try to just stick to the facts. And yes, and it's hard, but you're never going to please everyone. Whether it's from the left or the right, there's plenty of vitriol. We're hyper partisan. We're hyper polarized right now in the wake of the 2016 election and everything that's come since. And I can tell you that, if I'm, appearing on MSNBC or probably from here, making this appearance here, where I'll look at my Twitter later and it's going to be just a steady stream of attacks, but hopefully it's balanced between those on the left and the right.
So let's go out on this along those lines, because today is tax day. Happy Tax Day, everybody, April 17th this year. I see an AP fact check on your site this morning. Trump tax form simplification claim exaggerated. What's that about?
Yes. First of all, let me just say, that's one thing that the AP does, and I'm involved with some of them, others are my colleagues, that I'm glad we do, are these fact checks. It's not just for the president, although he seems to require them more than most, but trying to say, look, this is what a public official has said or a government institution says, here's what the reality is. And this is a good example where you probably remember when they were advocating the tax reform plan last winter, he or Paul Ryan or Mitch McConnell would hold up a little index card and say, look, your taxes are going to be so simple you can do it on the size of a postcard, and that's simply not true. That the changes, for a lot of people will result in being able to do it more or less on a one-page document, but that's the 1040EZ, which a lot of people can use now. And it's certainly, if you reach past a certain income level or have other mitigating factors, it's going to require a lot more paperwork. And in fact, the president himself, in recent days, until this moment, had even sort of walked away from the index card thing, which seems destined to be yet another political prop and never actual reality.
The truth is just another option. Jonathan Lemire, AP White House correspondent, thank you so much for joining us here in the Greene Space today. Brian Lehrer on WNYC. Coming up next, the president of the Planned Parenthood Federation of America, Cecile Richards. Stay with us.
Silicon Valley companies have a secret. These billion-dollar tech companies have to tell the government who works for them.
These companies are making products that change our lives, and that's why it's really important to know who works for them.
But most of them don't want the public to know. What are they hiding? Our reporters find a way in. Our Silicon Valley Choir breaks it down on the next Reveal. Tonight at 8 on 93.9 FM, WNYC.
WNYC is supported by Riverside Memorial Chapel, for generations a symbol of Jewish tradition. More info about arranging or pre-arranging funeral services available at 212-362-6600 or riversidememorialchapel.com. Mart Crowley's play The Boys in the Band, commemorating its 50th anniversary, directed by Joe Mantello. Limited Broadway engagement begins April 30th. Tickets available at boysintheband.com. WNYC is a media partner of the 2018 Tribeca Film Festival, presenting the Tribeca TV program, including Westworld, Genius, Freaks and Geeks the documentary, and Rest in Power, the story of Trayvon Martin, executive produced by Jay-Z. TribecaFilm.com.
WNYC, independent journalism in the public interest. 93.9 FM and AM 820. NPR News and the New York Conversation.
Brian Lehrer on WNYC, live in the Greene Space today. And when we're in the Greene Space, you can watch the show as well as listen, because we stream live video from here. You can go to WNYC.org and peek in right from the homepage, or you can use the WNYC Facebook page as well. With me now is Cecile Richards, best known as president for more than a decade of the Planned Parenthood Federation of America and the Planned Parenthood Action Fund. What you may not know is that she was Deputy Chief of Staff to House Democratic Leader Nancy Pelosi, excuse me, and she's the daughter of the last Democrat to be governor of Texas, Ann Richards. Now, Cecile Richards has a memoir, so we'll talk about past, present, and future. The book is called Make Trouble, Standing Up, Speaking Out, and Finding the Courage to Lead. Cecile, thanks for coming to the Greene Space. Welcome back to WNYC.
It's wonderful to be here. Thanks.
To the title of your book, you write, "To make change, you have to make trouble." What do you mean by trouble?
Well, I think every bit of social progress we've made in this country and around the world has been because people have stood up and questioned whether it's authority or cultural norms. I mean, the women's movement, the LGBTQ movement, the labor movement. And so, as my friend Congressman John Lewis would say, the important thing is to make good trouble, and that's really what this book is about.
Have you been able to make positive change as president of Planned Parenthood, or just mostly fend off negative change because anti-choice Republicans are in control of Congress in so many states for so long?
Actually, we've made enormous change despite the politics, but of course, every time I think mainly male politicians put their own politics ahead of women's health, women suffer. But and I recount in the book many episodes, good and bad, but one of the most important things that happened during the 12 years I was at Planned Parenthood was, of course, the day that after a long campaign, President Obama called me to say he was about to announce at the White House that from now on, all women would get birth control covered at no cost in their insurance plans. And that has absolutely revolutionized access to birth control in America. And something like 62 million women, I think, now have it without cost. And we're actually at the lowest teenage pregnancy rate in the history of the United States. So that's good change.
That's good change. What are the biggest threats right now to Planned Parenthood, or to contraception rights, or to abortion rights in general? Is it the 20-week limit proposals, or what would you say?
So I think that, there are definitely challenges at the federal level, and certainly President Trump has made no bones about the fact that he'd like to make bosses in charge of whether or not women can get birth control again. Although I can say from my experience around the country is that women are not going to let that happen. They've just ended as well the teen pregnancy prevention program, although we're in the court, as are others, challenging that decision since we're making such great progress there. But I think one of the things that's underreported probably, Brian, is that because of gerrymandering in the states, a lot of the state legislatures are really out of step with where women and, frankly, the public is on issues of reproductive health care. That's where I think the biggest challenges are. So it was one of the reasons it's so exciting to see so many women running for office now, not only in Congress, where I think we have twice as many as were running 2 years ago, but we also have women running for state legislatures, for Senate, and that's going to be really, really important to change at the state level.
The budget that Congress just passed and the president signed did not include the end of funding Planned Parenthood, as most of them ran on. How did that not happen?
So, one is because hundreds of thousands of people in this country pushed back. And as you know, this was, one of those stories I recount was that, Paul Ryan, although, of course, he's just announced his retirement too, parenthetically there. But Paul Ryan announced right after the inauguration that by February, there would be a bill on the president's desk that not only defunded Planned Parenthood, but also repealed Obamacare. And that really just lit a fire, I think, among folks all across the country. And we beat that back, and Planned Parenthood's doors are still open all across America. I think one of the things that happened in this most recent budget negotiation was a recognition that it was deeply unpopular to block access to Planned Parenthood. And of course, I think it's so important to remember that there were two women, Republican women in the United States Senate, Lisa Murkowski from Alaska and Susan Collins from Maine, who stood up for women, stood up for Planned Parenthood, and really have prevented the defunding of Planned Parenthood in this most recent session.
Let's talk about your memoir.
Oh, great. Okay, I'd love to.
What part of Texas did you grow up in?
Well, I'm very proud I was born in Waco, Brian, which is, as you know, kind of a small town, pretty conservative town. And in fact, there's a great story. I won't tell it here since we don't have time, but there's a great story in the book about the birth of my mother, Ann Richards, in Waco. So I'll just leave the audience waiting.
You don't want to tell the short version?
I could tell the really short version. So, my grandparents were from Waco. They were very humble, kind of Depression era survivors. And when my grandmother was pregnant with my mom, Ann Richards, she, of course, was not going to go to a hospital, either for economic reasons or you just didn't do that way when you lived in the country. And she had planned for a neighbor lady to come over and cook supper for my grandfather, because, of course, it was unthinkable that he would make his own dinner, even though she was in labor. But as the story goes, the neighbor lady could not figure out how to kill the chicken, and that was what was planned for dinner. And so in the birthing bed, in labor, my grandmother, Ona, hoisted herself up on her elbow and wrung that chicken's neck right there in the birthing bed. And that's how Ann Richards came into this world, and that's the kind of tough line of women I come from. So,
so let me play a clip of your mom. This is not the one that I think gets played over and over again, where she's at the Democratic Convention. What was that, 1988, when George H.W. Bush?
I think that's right. That's in Atlanta. Yeah.
And she's going, where was George? And he was born with a silver foot in his mouth and all of that.
Yes.
But
a memorable line.
Elsewhere in that speech, and relevant to your book and your, career in women's issues, she also said this.
For American women and the Republican majority, their president have been like a marriage that's gone from bad to worse. You know the story. The guy has a great line. He's sort of cute, and he tells you that life together will be bliss. And then in a few years, he's snoring on the couch while the TV blares on the 5th football game of the day. And the neighbors are screaming about the yard that never gets mowed, and there's a car up on blocks in the driveway. And your household budget is just stretched to the limit, and he's spending all the money on hunting trips, a new shotgun, and a camo jumpsuit. And you're standing there at the sink thinking, I must have been out of my mind.
Now, do you remember the actual political context of that? Was that...
I don't know, it sounds eerily familiar.
Because I'm thinking of this year's, or the 2016 election, where 53% of white women voted for Donald Trump, despite everything. And so there it seemed like your mom was trying to pry Republican voting women away from the party.
Yes, and look, I think we've got a lot of work to do, although I would like to point out, Brian, that Hillary Clinton did get 3 million more votes than Donald Trump. And so I think it's important that we have work to do, but I think there are millions of people in this country. And based on my experience, even this last couple of weeks out on book tour, women are coming out like crazy. I mean, they're not only running for office, they're starting new groups. They're voting in primaries. They've been calling Congress. And so I actually feel like, maybe it took this election to wake women up, but women are on fire, and I think they're the most important political force in this country. And And I'm sorry Mom isn't here to see it. Well, I'm really sorry Mom isn't here because she would have been just incredible on Twitter. But I really wish she could see what's happening with women today because it's incredibly exciting.
You write about campaigning for your mom for governor with a toddler in tow, and you were pregnant with twins. Was your family status a selling point?
Well, it was all I had. It was all, I didn't have much option. But yeah, if you've never lived until you've been in the Gilmer Jamboree Parade, and that's the celebration of the yam that we have in East Texas. Yeah, pregnant with twins, trying to get on a pair of suntan pantyhose to be in the float. It was not a pretty sight. But I do think, I think that in Texas, it's a big state. And it was important for Mom's race, since we never had any polls showing us winning. We had to get out there and do it retail style, and it was a real grassroots campaign.
And your mom was the last Democratic governor of Texas.
That's correct.
What were the years?
Well, she was elected in 90 and then, of course, lost in 94 in the kind of tidal wave that hit Democrats all across the country, including Mario Cuomo. But
turned out after 3 terms, even here in New York.
Yeah, it was a big year.
That was the 94 backlash against the first 2 years of Clinton and a Democratic Congress and their failed attempt at health reform. That was a lot of that.
Yeah, and I think, it was the first year we saw the really, really far right, and at that point it was termed the Christian Coalition, that Ralph Reed had started really influencing and making some of these hysterical far-right claims, and including about my mom. And that was, they were a very influential force, and frankly, at that point took over the Republican Party in Texas and a lot of other states as well. And I think we're seeing their influence continue today.
There's talk now, though, that even Texas could be part of the blue wave this year.
I'm thinking so.
In a number of congressional districts that could flip. Have you been looking at that closely enough to have a thought?
Yeah, no, it was fun. I was back in Texas, and one interesting thing, Brian, is in this. I was back with Wendy Davis, the state senator, who of course led that historic filibuster there, and we did a book event. But we were talking about the fact that 58% of the voters in the primary were women in Texas, which is really quite remarkable. And 2 of the congressional victories in the primary, and these are seats that are pretty assuredly Democratic, will mean that the first 2 Hispanic women will go to Congress from Texas. Never has happened before. Veronica Escobar and Sylvia Garcia. That to me is a sign that a state which is really a majority minority state and that undervotes. I mean, as folks say in Texas, we're not a red state, we're just a non-voting state. And that's what could really make the difference. And there's several competitive races. I think it's the first time Democrats have competed in every congressional contest.
My guest is Cecile Richards, if you're just joining us. President for more than a decade of the Planned Parenthood Federation of America and the Planned Parenthood Action Fund. Her new memoir is called Make Trouble, Standing Up, Speaking Out, and Finding the Courage to Lead. And we have a question, I think, here in the Greene Space. Hi there.
Hi. I just wanted to thank you, because I realized that over the past 25 years, which is like basically the span of my adult life, I grew up in New York. It was progressive time around feminism and around a burgeoning of women's rights. And now we have this kind of new wave and this new energy. But I felt during that time that it was a vulnerable period for women, and that there was a big fight that you were on the front lines of. So I want to thank you for that, and just ask you to shed a little light on whether, there was, I just imagine that there might have been some moments that were difficult within that period of time.
I can remember, one congressional hearing in particular that was challenging. But look, I think I sort of feel like if we have easy days, then we're probably not fighting hard enough. Because some people say to me, wow, Planned Parenthood, this must be so controversial. And I try to remind them that 100 years ago, our founder was thrown in jail for starting even to hand out information that was totally illegal at the time. My favorite story was right here in Brooklyn. Margaret Sanger and her sister Ethel and a volunteer started giving out 10 pamphlets for 10 cents a piece about birth control. And as the story goes, an undercover cop who posed as a mother came in and busted Margaret, threw her in jail where she taught all of her fellow inmates about birth control. And to me, that's kind of the spirit. But I do think it's important that, yes, we recognize there are threats to reproductive health care and rights and certainly equal access. But I also think we have to celebrate the victories and lift them up. Because those happened not because people in Washington changed their minds. They happened because people mobilized around the country. And I think that is what is right now, as women are this, sort of shaking the foundation on everything, whether it is on basic rights, whether it's on Me Too and Time's Up. This is a moment for women of all ages, not just young women. But I just was in Sarasota, Florida, and I met a woman who's in her 80s volunteering at Planned Parenthood. She had never been volunteered anywhere before, and she said, now it's time. So, yeah, I think there's room for everyone to do stuff.
Another question here in the Greene Space. Hi.
Hi. Back to Texas politics for a minute. Do you think the Cruz seat is at all possible for the Democrats? Please say yes.
Listen, I think Beto is absolutely giving Senator Cruz a run for his money. I think Senator Cruz is nervous, and I would be too. I mean, it is. He's not well liked in Texas and not well liked in Washington. Actually, I don't think he's well liked in the country. And so it is really, Beto's race kind of does remind me a bit of Mom's in that, one of the things, I think in the last presidential election, we only had something like 46% turnout in Texas, if that. It may have even been lower. That just means what we have to do is expand the number of people that go to the polls, and that is exactly what Beto was focused on doing. So, it's very exciting to see.
Sir.
Yes. In reference to what do you think that some of the states are preparing passing legislation like 15-week legislation, preparing to go to the Supreme Court, because although what you say is absolutely right, the Supreme Court could very well rule against Roe v. Wade. Yeah. And do you think that's happening?
Yeah, and thanks for the question, because I would have, if I'd had time, Brian, I would have probably said that's the two biggest threats to me are what's happening in state legislatures and then, of course, the Supreme Court. And I think folks I'm sure you've been following this breakneck pace by which this administration is jamming through lifetime appointees to the federal bench. Folks that are voted, that are not qualified, not rated qualified by the American Bar Association, folks with the most extreme point of view, with no judicial experience, and they're going through on party line votes. It's really disturbing. And so I think that, and I know right now we are part of a big fight on, and one of the nominees, Wendy Vitter, that who is up. Whose positions, she couldn't even answer the other day in a Senate hearing what she felt about the Brown versus Board decision. This is how extreme it is. But I think all of this is rolling up to enormous fight for all of us, not just women's rights, but everything. If there is in fact a Supreme Court vacancy under this presidency, so I think there's huge danger there, and it would be. Of course, that would overturn 45 years of established law if, in fact, they overturned Roe.
I think Wendy Vitter said something specifically about Planned Parenthood, too. Am I right?
Oh, she is absolutely against abortion rights. She's she's spoken at anti-choice rallies. She is supported pamphlets that actually link birth control with violent death. She is about as extreme as you could get. And so it's really important for us at Planned Parenthood that people recognize this is the kind of nominee that this presidency and this president is putting forward. And this is a lifetime appointment.
I heard the clip of her on Brown versus Board of Education, but she framed it as, I'm not going to take a public position on any particular Supreme Court case to keep my hands clean of any prejudgment of anything. Is when she puts it in that universal a way, does she cover herself?
I don't know. It was pretty painful to watch. I don't think anyone who's watched that clip would feel confident about her support for either Supreme Court precedent or just some of the most fundamental rights that we have assumed are given. And look, I think everything is up for grabs right now with this administration. There is not a single thing that I think anyone can assume is secure. That, again, is why, it's really why I wrote this book. I feel like every day someone was stopping me on the street or on the subway saying, what can I do? And as opposed to talking to everyone on the subway, I thought, maybe I'll just put it in a book instead.
You wrote about a meeting you had with Jared and Ivanka Trump. Was that before the election or after?
No, that was after the election. And it was actually after the inauguration. And I think one of the reasons I had, that Ivanka Trump had reached out and wanted to talk about Planned Parenthood, and, candidly, I was quite dubious about doing this, but I think that anywhere I can go to talk about the important work that Planned Parenthood does and the millions of women and young people who count on us for care, I have to do that. But ultimately, the meeting really didn't go that well.
In what way?
Well, and it turned out it was with Jared Kushner as well. So I begged my husband, Kirk, to go with me. I said, I'm not going to go by myself. At least I need a witness. And basically, Jared Kushner said to me that he really felt like if we would just quit providing access to safe and legal abortion in America, he could secure our funding because he could talk to Paul Ryan. And I just said, well, that is not going to happen. Planned Parenthood, we are never going to trade away women's rights in this country for money. And he said, well, the Republicans control everything, and if you want to make a deal, this is the time to make it. And I said, I don't want to make a deal. And that pretty much ended the conversation. But it was really disturbing to think that they would propose trading away a right of women in this country to access to safe and legal abortion for funding.
Where did you get the sense, if you did get one, that came from Jared Kushner? Is he personally against abortion rights, or was he just seeing a transactional thing to raise with you?
I have no idea what's going on in his head. But I will say, I think that, I think he was trying to make a deal. I think he wanted to be seen as a savvy deal maker. And I thought it was a very naive approach. And I mean, I really did say, look, this is the important work that we do that's going to be difficult for women to access. And I said, Planned Parenthood is a healthcare provider to millions of people, and many of our patients, they have no one else to go to. I think one of the reasons, though, maybe he reached out is because, as you remember, the day after the inauguration, we saw the largest marches in the history of the United States of America for women's rights. And I think they knew that this effort to defund Planned Parenthood was just going to be like a match on dry kindling, as it was.
Question over here. We have somebody, right? Over here? Okay, hi.
So I've been an admirer of you for many, many years, and had hoped that if Hillary won, you'd end up in the cabinet. And I know you haven't announced what you're doing next. You've got a couple more weeks left as head of Planned Parenthood, but would you consider a run for office?
So that's not thank you very much. And yes, we all worked really hard. A lot of us worked hard for Hillary, and she would have been an outstanding president. And I hope that she's made it easier for the next woman who runs for president. I believe she has. So I don't have any plans to run for office immediately, but I will tell you, even after I leave Planned Parenthood, one, I'll be a lifelong advocate, troublemaker, agitator for women's rights, for reproductive rights. And I'm going to spend every waking moment I have between now and this November making sure that we get every single person we can registered, activated, and out to vote.
We just have a few minutes left. As daughter of a Texas governor, do you know Barbara Bush?
I didn't know Barbara Bush, but I have followed her.
We know she's in failing health.
We do, and it's really, my prayers go out to her family.
Do you have a reaction to the hiring and firing of Kevin Williamson by The Atlantic?
I think it was the right thing to do. I can't imagine that it is considered acceptable the statements he's made about women and about women who have abortions are not only offensive, they're dangerous. And I think we have seen at Planned Parenthood very painfully what it means to have people in both public office and in the media talking about women and women who make these decisions in the way that they have. So I personally think it was the right decision, and I'm grateful for folks having raised the issue.
And for people who don't know that story, Kevin Williamson is a conservative columnist who was hired by The Atlantic recently, despite the fact that he had said at one time, I guess as a snarky quip, that women who have abortion should be hanged. And they let that pass as a one-off, bad taste kind of snark. But then they discovered that he had said more earnestly on at least one other occasion that women who have abortion should be punished in some way.
Right. No, he really doubled down on it. And again, I think we have worked really hard at Planned Parenthood over the last 12 years to try to reduce the stigma and shame that that women are put upon, and particularly it is really offensive to see people in public office saying the kinds of things they do about women who should be respected, should be able to make their own personal, private decisions, particularly about something as personal as pregnancy.
What's your answer just to the direct question from people who do not support abortion rights, who would say, and Ross Douthat had a column about this after the firing of Kevin Williamson, who would say an embryo or a fetus is a human life, and we can't morally kill it any more than we can kill born people?
Well, I mean, he can have his own point of view. I think that people have obviously wildly different points of view about pregnancy and abortion, and I think that's why it's important that women or pregnant people and their doctors and their whoever they want to consult with are able to make their decisions, not Ross and not any political pundit or politician.
You write in the book that you almost didn't go to the job interview to run Planned Parenthood.
I know.
When was that, and why was that?
Well, I had to admit it because I felt like I wasn't qualified. And I think a lot of women I've been seeing on the road on this book tour come up to me later and say, "I'm so glad you said that." Because I think I was worried that I had never run anything this big. It's such an important institution. What if I messed up? And so right before the interview, I was about to call and cancel. And I did what any grown woman would do. I called my mother. And I said, "I don't know what to do." And she said, "Cecile, get over it. You have got to try. You'll always regret it if you don't." And I hope I sprinkle a lot of Ann Richards' wisdom throughout this book. But one of hers was, imagine the worst thing that could happen. If you can get over that, go for it. And it's been helpful to me the rest of my life. And thank goodness I went. I've been grateful to have this job ever since.
Well, a lot of women in America and men are grateful that you did. And we thank Cecile Richards, who has been the president of the Planned Parenthood Federation of America and Planned Parenthood Action Fund for about 10 years, and is now the author of Make Trouble, Standing Up, Speaking Out, and Finding the Courage to Lead. And listeners, if you want to see Cecile Richards in person, she's got a couple of events coming up in our area. First one is this Saturday, April 21st, at Book Review in Huntington. That's on New York Avenue in Huntington Village. That's Saturday at 3 o'clock. And then next Monday, April 23rd at 7 p.m. at Temple Emmanuel's Stryker Center. That's 65th and 5th in Manhattan. And I see there you will be in conversation with Brittany Packnett. So that's like Black Lives Matter meets Planned Parenthood.
Yeah, it's going to be great. So I can't wait.
Thank you so much for coming to the Greene
Brian.
Space.
Thanks for having me.
This is WNYC FM HD and AM New York, WNJT FM 88.1 Trenton, WNJP 88.5 Sussex, WNJY 89.3 Netcong, and WNJO 90.3 Toms River. We are New York and New Jersey Public Radio. Brian Lehrer with you live in the Greene Space today, where it is time for the latest news, live from the Greene Space stage with Shumita Basu.
Hi, Brian. This just in, a new ruling passed down from the Supreme Court this morning. The court has decided to throw out part of a federal law that required the mandatory deportation of immigrants who've been convicted of some crimes. The court's ruling says that law was unconstitutionally vague. CNN is reporting that Justice Neil Gorsuch sided with the more liberal judges for the first time since joining the court, ending in a 5-4 majority to invalidate the federal statute. The decision is a loss for President Trump's administration, which, like President Obama's administration before it, had defended the provision at issue before the Supreme Court. A federal judge in New York says she may appoint a neutral lawyer to help decide the confidentiality of items of evidence seized by the FBI from Michael Cohen, President Trump's personal lawyer. The judge told prosecutors to begin cataloging evidence while a system is set up to ensure that items protected by attorney-client privilege are not disclosed to investigators. Mayor de Blasio says the hundreds of police disciplinary records published by BuzzFeed News should be available to the public, but not through the means they were obtained. He talks about the report on New York One's Inside City Hall yesterday.
This is exactly the type of information that should be legally available by changing the law in Albany known as 50A. And that's what I believe in, and that's what Commissioner O'Neill believes in.
50A is a controversial section of New York State's 1976 civil rights law that says police, fire, and corrections department employees' disciplinary records are confidential. But while the mayor claims he wants more transparency, critics say his administration is also withholding records from the public eye and has been fighting advocates in court. The union representing police officers has blasted the database, saying it puts officers at risk. New York City is implementing plans to house inmates consistent with their gender identity and will continue to run a transgender housing unit for its city jails. At one point, the housing unit was slated for closure because the Department of Corrections said it violated federal regulations prohibiting segregated housing. But the rule has been clarified, and the unit will stay open as an alternative for gender nonconforming inmates. Dory Lewis, an attorney with Legal Aid's Prisoner Rights Project, says transgender inmates are regularly mocked and belittled inside city jails.
When they go to court, they're taken sometimes in buses with male prisoners because they're coming from a jail with male prisoners. And one person has reported to me recently that other male prisoners that she's gone to court with have exposed themselves to her.
Lewis says the city must do a better job of informing inmates the unit exists and speed up the process for transferring them to the unit. The number of asylum cases in Canada is at an all-time high, and that's driven in part by Haitians fleeing the U.S. WNYC's Arun Venugopal has more about a report from the Pew Research Center.
What's noteworthy about this report is that the number one group applying for asylum in Canada, by far, is Haitians. We also know that many Haitians have been leaving the U.S. They've been crossing the border from New York into Quebec because they're scared about the end of TPS, or temporary protected status.
TPS for Haitians in the United States expires in July of next year. A controversial Central Park statue is being moved today. Mayor de Blasio's Public Design Commission voted to relocate a statue of Dr. J. Marion Sims from its location in Central Park to Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn. Sims was honored for his advances in gynecology, but was known to have performed surgical experiments on enslaved black women without anesthesia. WNYC's Danny Lewis was at the scene as they took down the statue at around 9 o'clock this morning. A small group of onlookers had gathered to watch and send off the statue.
Hey, goodbye. Goodbye. Woo! Good riddance.
The statue was one of several considered for removal by the Mayor's Landmarks Commission, including the Columbus Circle Monument, but it's the only one that will be removed or relocated. The Sims statue will eventually be replaced by a new monument in Central Park. And April is National Poetry Month. WNYC has only one way to celebrate. We challenge our listeners to write their own original poems. Each week has had a different theme, and this week the prompt was, write a poem about a bodega. Kirsten Lambertson lives in Red Bank, New Jersey, but she once lived near Union Square, so this is an ode to her old bodega.
Knowing our first kiss was near, we swaggered through the snug aisles to the back fridge full of beer, full of ourselves and our glittering city around us. We smiled at each other when the gentle cashier asked, "Are you too famous?"
Thank you for that one, Kirsten. And everyone else, please have at it. Send us your best poems. Kids would love to hear from some younger poets as well. If you're feeling inspired, write a poem about your bodega. Share it with us on Twitter. You can use the hashtag NYCityVerse. That's all one word, NYCityVerse. Friday is your last day to send a bodega poem to us, and on Friday's morning edition, I'll tell you what the topic is for next week's Poetry Challenge and share some of your poems from this week as well. Now, I just can't resist but share this Bodega Cat song to get us to the weather. It is such an earworm, so here, let's have a little mid-morning flail together.
Hey, bodega cat, hey, bodega cat, hey, bodega cat.
You're going to be chanting this all day now, so you're welcome. The weather forecast before I leave you: cloudy, a chance of showers this afternoon, and breezy with gusts up to 30 miles per hour at times. Highs around 50 degrees. Tonight, pretty cold, lows in the upper 30s. It's 45 degrees right now in Prospect Park, Brooklyn. And that's the latest from the WNYC newsroom and from the Greene Space. I'm Shamitha Basu.
Scratch his head and he's like, what you looking at? Hey, bodega cat.
Do you believe everything you see on social media? Stick with the names you trust.
This is Morning Edition from NPR News. I'm Rachel Martin in Washington, D.C.
And I'm David Greene.
Nancy Solomon, WNYC News.
Arun Venugopal, WNYC News.
Andrea Bernstein, WNYC News.
Carrie Johnson, NPR News, Washington.
Ilya Meritz, WNYC News.
Cindy Rodriguez, WNYC News.
Listen to Morning Edition every day on WNYC.
WNYC supporters include Rodgers and Hammerstein's Carousel on Broadway at the Imperial Theater, starring Joshua Henry, Jesse Mueller, and Renee Fleming, choreographed by Justin Peck and directed by Jack O'Brien. Tickets and information at telecharge.com. Hospital for Special Surgery. HSS Quality Care is now available at multiple locations throughout the tri-state area. More at hss.edu. Capital One, which offers interest-bearing CDs, including the 12-month CD, available at a Capital One location. Leadership support for digital innovation at WNYC is provided by the Jerome L. Green Foundation.
Oh, Bodega Cat. I'm sorry. She got me with the earworm. Oh, my goodness. It's the Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. Good morning again, everyone. Live from the Greene Space today. And when we're in the Greene Space, you can watch the show as well as listen. Just go to WNYC.org. We're streaming video right on the homepage, or you can use the WNYC Facebook page as well if you want to watch us instead of listen to us today. Now, One Book, One New York is back. It's a citywide contest to get New Yorkers reading the same book at the same time. It's like a giant citywide book club. Right now, they're in the voting period. You can go to nyc.gov/onebook to choose the book you think everyone should read from the list of finalists. And I'm really pleased to be joined now by Julie Menon, the Commissioner of the Mayor's Office of Media Entertainment, and all four living authors of the 5 nominated books. Jennifer Egan, author of Manhattan Beach; Hari Kunzru, author of White Tears; Imbolo Mbwe, author of Behold the Dreamers; and Esmeralda Santiago, author of When I Was Puerto Rican. Now, the last book on the ballot is a classic by the late James Baldwin. It's his If Beale Street Could Talk. And here to represent that is the film director and writer Barry Jenkins. His last film, Moonlight, won the Oscar for Best Picture, and he's working on the film adaptation of Baldwin's Beale Street. And he is with us on the phone. So what an all-star lineup we are honored to have with us. Welcome them all to WNYC and the Greene Space stage. Wow. And Barry Jenkins, are you there on the phone?
I am. I'm here.
Good. Just checking the line. So, Commissioner, why should the whole city read the same book at the same time? What's the idea behind this?
Brian, this is the second year we've done the One Book, One New York program. And last year we had such a tremendous response from New Yorkers all across the city. Part of the program is obviously about financial literacy, but part of it also is to engage in a civic conversation about the city. All 5 books represent iconic New York neighborhoods and really talk about issues that are particular to New Yorkers and themes that really resonate with the city. So we encourage New Yorkers to read these 5 books. We have over 5,000 copies in the public libraries. So all 219 public library branches in New York City have copies of all of these wonderful books. And during the month of April, we're encouraging New Yorkers to vote for the one book they want the city of New York to read.
And before we hear from the authors, I see the point of this is also to celebrate and support the publishing industry here in New York, a major New York industry, and our independent bookstores and libraries.
Well, that's exactly right. So that was one of the policy reasons why we launched the program last year, and that really did work. Sadly, many independent bookstores throughout the city are closing, and we really want to counteract that. Through the One Book program last year, we were able to increase sales at independent bookstores by over 400% of the winning book, and so we want to be able to repeat that again this year.
Great. Now, all 5 of these books take place at least partially in New York City. So I wonder if you can each take a minute to talk about the role of the city and its neighborhood or neighborhoods that it takes place in as muse or character. Barry, will you start with the Harlem that James Baldwin wrote about in If Beale Street Could Talk? The book came out in 1974. Was it set at that time?
It is. I think it spans the book is nonlinear, so it jumps around from the childhood of the protagonist through the present day story that's being told. So it takes place primarily in Harlem, but also touches on the village, both east and west. It's just really a snapshot of the city in transition at that time. And making the film was this really beautiful experience because a few people knew who I was, but everyone knew who Baldwin was and his love of Harlem. So I think it's a very wonderful cross-section because the main character, Fonny, is a guy born and raised in Harlem, but he feels most comfortable, as he describes himself, amongst the freaks of the village, where he just wants to buy a loft and sculpt. And then the world intervenes in this way that sets Baldwin on this path of telling a procedural against the backdrop of a Harlem love story. So it's been a really wonderful experience to adapt.
Jennifer, your book title is a neighborhood name, Manhattan Beach, and the Brooklyn Navy Yard shows up as well in the period of World War II. What about Manhattan Beach itself were you trying to show your readers?
Well, Manhattan Beach has kind of an amazing history. I mean, it started out as a place where these huge Gilded Age resort hotels were very exclusive. Then those disappeared, and it was a place where people went sort of, there were summer bungalows. During the war, there was a Coast Guard training center and a Merchant Marine training center there. And now Kingsborough College is there. So it's a place that in a way really manifests the constantly changing New York landscape. And also my real subject was the waterfront of New York. And it's also, it's right there, kind of relating to the water at all times.
Now, listeners, if you have a question for any of these 5 stars, literary and film stars who are with us for this segment in the Greene Space, you can call in. You can consider this like a candidates debate, right? So if you want to ask them a question, why should your book win the... If you can frame a specific question around that, we would love to hear it at 212-433-WNYC, 433-9692, or anything you've always wanted to ask as a reader or a moviegoer of Jennifer Egan, Hari Kunzru, Mbolo Mbwe, Esmeralda Santiago, or Barry Jenkins. 212-433-WNYC, 433-9692. And of course, those of you here in our Greene Space audience, just raise your hand and we'll come around with a mic. So continuing to go down the row here, Hari, White Tears takes place largely in Greenwich Village, but elsewhere as well, in a contemporary story set basically today, would you say? Why the Village?
Well, it's not contemporary completely. It's a sort of story that drags the present day back into the past. It's a lot to do with the sounds of the city, to do with the music culture, and to do with record collecting. And I got fascinated by a little coterie of blues record collectors, actually centered around a guy who lived in Hawaii in Williamsburg just after the Second World War, who developed the taste for the blues as a musical form, outside its original Southern roots. And that fed into the folk revival, all the singers and musicians who used to congregate in Washington Square in the 50s and 60s, the cafe culture of Greenwich Village. So all that is wrapped up into a story which kind of shuttles between the past and a kind of hipster present day, which is more kind of Greenpoint and Bushwick and Williamsburg.
Do you have overlap with Baldwin, does the song Beale Street Blues come up?
There's no actual Beale Street reference, but you can't really, you can't quite escape Baldwin in this city.
Imbolo, Behold the Dreamers takes place somewhat in Harlem and around the city, as the protagonist is a chauffeur for Lehman Brothers, and a Lehman Brothers executive and his family in the early aughts, right before and during the financial crisis period, which of course crashed Lehman Brothers. I'm curious if you know Baldwin's Beale Street, and if you have any comparison of his 1970s and other Harlem representation to yours from maybe 30 years later.
No, I don't know about Baldwin's Beale Street, but I used to live in Harlem myself, and I got inspiration for this novel while living in Midtown. And one of the family the chauffeur works for, they live in the Upper East Side. So the novel came out of my fascination with New York City. I moved to the city in the mid-2000s, and it was the very first time that I found myself feeling at home in America. So in some way, it was an homage to my new hometown.
Had you been elsewhere in America and felt less at home?
Yes, very much so.
Where was that?
New Jersey.
Wait, that's the same thing.
No, I love New Jersey. No, just something about New York City made me feel very comfortable, even as an immigrant and as just a person. I felt very welcome.
Esmeralda Santiago, when I was Puerto Rican, first takes place in Puerto Rico, then in Williamsburg, around Graham Avenue and Bushwick in the 1960s. This is a neighborhood that's changed so much in the past 50 years or so. What Bushwick, Williamsburg story, essentially, were you trying to tell in the book?
I was trying to tell my story of a rural Puerto Rican girl arriving in a big city and having to understand and make sense of a whole new culture, new climate, new language, and being a 13-year-old girl and realizing that my mother expected something very different than what I was experiencing in Brooklyn and then later in Manhattan. So it's really based on what happened to me, and when I think about Brooklyn, it's such a different place from the place that I knew that it's practically unrecognizable to me.
Barry Jenkins, let me go back to you because I know you have to go a little early, so I just want to give you the first chance, and then we're going to go down the row, to sing the praises of the book you're here representing, If Beale Street Could Talk. First, why should people vote for James Baldwin's If Beale Street Could Talk?
Now I am a politician. Baldwin to me is New York, and there's something about this novel that really resonated with me, which is, we're all kind of unified by the same thing, which is either the absence or abundance of love in our life, and Baldwin just does a great job of depicting that abundance and absence both within an evolving city. And also to its citizens, and I just think it's one of Baldwin's lesser-known works. I would say, in the sense that when I tell people I'm working on Baldwin, they assume it's Giovanni's Room or another country. But If Beale Street Could Talk, it's just this beautiful love story to Baldwin's home, and it's interesting because he's an author who spent so much time outside the country that this very searing portrait of New York was, I think, his love letter to the city.
I'm curious, since this book club project is to start conversations all over the city about, the issues and the stories, et cetera, that are raised in whichever book gets selected, what kinds of conversations do you think people will be having if Beale Street Could Talk is selected?
I think, one, people will walk around the city and marvel at what the city has become because it's such a searing snapshot of what the city was. I think also, as well, when you read this book, a lot has changed since the early 1970s, but just as many things remain the same. And I think in that sense, because we think of Baldwin as being a snapshot or being this voice from a very particular time, when you read this book and hopefully when we watch this film, you'll see more things are the same than they are different. And I think in that way it'll be a very amazing jumping off point of a conversation. Even to listening to Esmeralda, I'm reminded that there's a subplot in the book where Harlem and Puerto Rico are kind of connected, because our main character has to journey to Puerto Rico to get to the bottom of this thing that happened, because a woman has left New York and left Harlem to return to Puerto Rico. So I think it's just for something that is almost a time capsule. It's very, very relevant today.
Now we have a little surprise for you before you go. We have the actual song that Baldwin's title refers to, Beale Street Blues. Can we play a little bit of that right now?
If Beale Street could talk, if Beale Street could talk, married men would have to take their beds in war, except one or two who never drink booze, and the blind man on the corner who sings the Beale Street Blues. He says, I'd rather
Armstrong on W.C. Handy. Does the song show up in your film adaptation?
It does not. It does not. You know, the song is from one particular period, and I just didn't imagine that our characters would be listening to it. But like most things with Baldwin, it's about the spirit and the essence of the thing. And even just hearing that rendition of it, there's definitely a darkness and a melancholy, but there's a beauty as well. And I think at this time, you know, the late 1960s into early 1970s, you could very much say that of the city and of Harlem in particular.
That's great. Do you have a release date for the film?
Oh, man, I'm getting ahead of myself now. I cannot say.
That's okay. All right. Well, now you have some number of people who have advanced word of the fact that a movie version is coming out. Thanks for coming on today and representing the book.
Thanks for having me, Brian, and congratulations to all the wonderful authors.
And we're going to continue in a minute and ask you all the same question. What kind of a conversation would the city be having if your book is selected for the One Book, One New York? And we're going to go to this break with another piece of music just to represent a little news that broke in the last day. Kendrick Lamar's album, Damn, has become the first non-classical, non-jazz album ever to win the Pulitzer Prize for Music. So we're going to go to the break with a little bit from that.
If I didn't ride blade on curve, would you still? If I'm in my mind at work, would you still? Keep it 100, I'd rather you trust me than two. Keep it a whole 100, don't got you, I got nothing. Hey, I got something. Hold up, we gon' function. Hey, no assumption. Hey, feeling like Tyson with it. Knock it out twice, I'm with it. Only for the night, I'm kidding.
On the next Fresh Air, my interview with former FBI Director James Comey, which I just recorded. I asked about how he seems to be sounding an alarm about the president. We talked about the accusations Comey used a double standard in making public the Hillary Clinton emails, but not discussing Russian interference in the election. We talked about lots more. Join us. Weekdays at 2 on 93.9 FM WNYC.
Support for WNYC comes from Montclair Film, presenting Taylor Mack, performing a 24-decade history of popular music abridged on Friday, May 4th at 7 p.m. at the Montclair Film Festival. Tickets and information at montclairfilm.org. You value the programs you hear on WNYC. That's why you're listening right now. So are thousands of others, people who would learn about your business on our air. Learn more about corporate sponsorship at wnyc.org/sponsor.
This April, as we celebrate Earth Day and Arbor Day, there's an easy way to support not just WNYC, but the entire planet as well. Become a WNYC sustaining member now. Your automatic monthly donation in the amount you choose will help support in-depth, independent news reporting and everything you rely on from WNYC. And you'll save trees by eliminating the need for mailing renewal notices. So be a hero. Go to WNYC.org and click on Donate.
Brian Lehrer on WNYC, live in the Greene Space today. When we're in the Greene Space, you can watch us as well as listen to us. We're streaming live video at WNYC.org or on the WNYC Facebook page. And we continue with the 4 living authors of 4 of the 5 books that are finalists in New York City's One Book, One New York contest, a citywide competition to get New Yorkers reading the same book at the same time. It's like a giant citywide book club. And still with us after we heard from Barry Jenkins representing James Baldwin's If Beale Street Could Talk are Jennifer Egan, author of Manhattan Beach, Hari Kunzru, author of White Tears, Mbolo Mbwe, author of Behold the Dreamers, and Esmeralda Santiago, author of When I Was Puerto Rican. So let's continue what we started with Barry. Jennifer, what kinds of conversations would people be having in their book clubs if Manhattan Beach is selected?
Well, I mean, there are 3 major characters in the book. One is a young 19-year-old woman who's working at the Brooklyn Navy Yard. This is during the fall of 1942, so World War II. So she's one character. Her father, who is an Irish-American sort of dock worker, longshoreman, who has abandoned the family during the Depression, and then a gangster whom Anna senses has had a business relationship with her father, and whom her path crosses in the period that she's working at the Navy Yard. So those are sort of the major characters. One of the things that was really striking to me, having the book come out this fall, it's very much about female strength in some sense. Anna works at the Navy Yard as nearly 5,000 women did during the war, and she ultimately is able to become a deep sea diver working on ship repair, which is something women were not allowed to do. But one thing that was interesting about the Navy Yard is that for the first couple of years that women worked there, they were not allowed to go on ships. And the reason was because who knew what the men might do in these compressed spaces with women? And women objected to this, and ultimately it really behooved the Navy Yard to get the women onto the ships because they were slighter and more limber and they could get into these tight spaces. But it was interesting with the eruption of the Me Too movement to think about the fact that, you know, in some ways we're still dealing with these same problems. I mean, I laughed reading about women not going on ships and thinking, oh, like men can't control themselves in a compressed space with a woman. Well, maybe not as well as we thought. So that is an unexpected conversation that I think perhaps would happen.
Who thought they could? Never mind. Hari Kunzru, what about if White Tears is selected? What kind of conversations do you imagine?
I think it might be conversations about ghosts. White Tears is a ghost story, really, in essence. It's about 2 young white record producers in the present day who fake a 1920s blues record using some audio of a singer that they've picked up in Washington Square Park at the chess tables there. And they put this out on the internet. They do it as a sort of calling card for their record producing business, and to show that they can give new things the patina of age. And then somebody gets in touch with them, an old collector, and says, well, where did you hear this record? And they say, well, we made it up. And he says, no, you didn't. And the possibility opens up that instead of faking something, they've actually channeled something from the past that wants to be made felt in the present. And New York, like any big city, but more than most, really, New York is a city that has layers, and not just physical layers. There are kind of cultural layers to this place. There are ghosts of past versions of the city that you encounter traces of whenever you're walking around. And I got to know the city when I came here 10 years ago by recording as I walked around downtown and picking up all these like little kind of micro worlds of sound that you find in the city. And that
you should work in radio.
I would love to make radio.
Let's talk after the show. We talk a lot here about fake news. This is our first conversation about fake music. Mbolo, how about if Behold the Dreamers is selected? What kind of conversations do you imagine at these book clubs around the city?
So when I started writing the book, I was writing a story set around the financial crisis. One of the characters was an executive at Lehman Brothers. And I thought it would be a book about, what it was like, living in New York City during the financial crisis. But most people read the book, they want to talk about the issues of dreams, because the book is called Behold the Dreamers, and it has a lot to do with the American dream, but just any kind of dream, and what happened to these families and all of these characters when their dreams were threatened, and the choices they made to see their dreams come true. A lot of it is about family and friendship and love and just being human and searching for happiness. I mean, it is very much a story about the pursuit of happiness, especially as immigrant, but also as anybody who lives in this country today and has to deal with issues of class and race.
The term the dreamers, of course, is so commonly applied now to that particular group of immigrants who were brought here illegally by their parents as children but grew up American. Is this a reference to that in any way, the title?
No, this was a reference to just having any dream of a better life. It refers to the immigrants coming here with dreams of achieving the American dream.
And Esmeralda Santiago, if When I Was Puerto Rican was chosen, what kind of conversations do you imagine?
I think that my book is about what happened to me as a rural child in Puerto Rico, in what I thought was the last generation that would grow up the way I did, which no electricity, no running water, being in a rural part of the island, far away from the metropolitan area. And then on September 20th of last year, Puerto Rico became just like the place that I grew up in. And I think that were my book chosen, and I do hope that people will choose all these books, actually. I've read all of them. They're wonderful. I think we're all looking at New York City from very different, through different eyes, but very often seeing very much the same thing. And my book mostly takes place in Puerto Rico, and right now millions of Puerto Ricans are living like that. And then the last part of it is about what happens when you come to a place like New York from a community like that. And this is what's happening to hundreds of thousands of Puerto Ricans who are having to leave the island in the same conditions that I left it, and then having the same experience in the United States. And I think there will be a lot of discussion around those kinds of issues. And I think especially for the Puerto Ricans who read it, I did not go back to Puerto Rico. I was brought here. I did not go back, but a lot of them will have to make that decision. Am I going to? Will I be able to?
We got one call from a listener as you were going down the row there, and I think Sandra in Manhattan wants to electioneer for your book, Esmeralda. So Sandra in Manhattan, you're on WNYC. Hello.
Hello. I am living with the most incredible coincidence, and some of them are marvelous. I have a group of ESL students who I'm teaching, and this is the second time in the past few years that I chose Esmeralda Santiago's book. And when I heard this morning, I thought, oh my goodness, that's the one we have to open up. The discussion that has evolved in my class with foreign students who come from Greece, Ecuador, Russia, and Japan. They sound like different countries, but the struggles, there was so much identification with all through the book, even though many of them did not come from very, very rural, except for two of them. So I think that as the book evolved, they evolved, conversation evolved. As an ESL teacher, I'm very concerned about dialogue and sharing and growing because of it. We got to know each other through the book. And for New Yorkers, with the multitude of populations here, how important it is to see that movement, that struggle, the change in in Esmeralda, who is called Negi in the book, as she comes to Brooklyn and then to New York, and eventually auditions to be as part of a special high school, and then eventually to graduate from Harvard. I mean, wow,
Sandra,
this book is the winner.
Wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you, Sandra.
Thank you for your service teaching ESL classes. And you're Esmeralda's agent, aren't you? No, I'm kidding. Thank you very much.
Not only that, in about 10 minutes, the part of the class is coming to my home with lunches traditional to their country that we will all share and talk about.
Thank you very much again. We're almost out of time. We'll take one more question from here in the Greene Space. Hi, make it real quick.
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me?
It's on.
Hi, my name is Raymond Lotta. I'm from Revolution Books in Harlem, and I wanted to pose a question to everyone. But let me first just quickly say that we are living in this incredibly dangerous moment with this Trump-Pence regime hammering into place, a fascist America. This is what it wants to do, and it is really imperiling humanity and the planet. And our bookstore is a place where people come to find out about why the world is the way it is and how it can be radically different. And right now we are projecting this film by Bob Avakian, which is the most comprehensive explanation of how we've gotten to the place where a regime like this is in power and what needs to be done. And our bookstore has been in the crosshairs of attacks by fascist thugs unleashed by this regime. Here's the question that I wanted to put to the panel. These are unprecedentedly dangerous times, the most dangerous times in 70 years, the threats of war, nuclear war. You've written wonderful works. We have those books in our store. We have discussions about them. What I'd like to ask is, how do you see the responsibility and challenge of being a creative writer of imagination in dangerous times like these?
Thank you. And you obviously don't need an agent, but well done. We are so out of time. Who's burning to answer that question? Who would really like to answer that question? Any one of you? Hari, it looks like...
I'll say something. Yeah, I mean, I think fiction is always political. It's political because you choose certain stories to tell. You put yourself in the position of trying to present the world in all its complexity. And I think if there's one thing that unites all these books, it's a vision of New York that is absolutely opposed to that kind of exclusive vision of America. This is an incredibly inclusive version of the city. It's a city that is for all New Yorkers, newer ones and native New Yorkers.
I would add one quick thing. Having spent a lot of time thinking about the wartime New York, there is a strong streak of gangsterism in American culture, and it goes way back. And that's really what I ended up writing about in this book. This didn't come out of nowhere. This is part of us in a certain sense. And so I think owning that and understanding the history of it is important. And we fiction writers are always trying to connect the past to the present.
Now, Commissioner Julie Menon from the Mayor's Office of, let me get it right, the Mayor's Office of Media and Entertainment. I'll give you the last word. As I mentioned, an event that people might be interested in if you're enjoying this conversation this Thursday night, April 19th at 7:30. The four authors here, as well as director Barry Jenkins, who was with us representing James Baldwin's If Beale Street Could Talk, will join a panel discussion as part of the Pan America World Voices Festival. That'll be at the New Schools Auditorium in the Alvin Johnson J.M. Hall. The event is free and open to the public on a first-come, first-served basis. And there's a link to RSVP for that event on the One Book site, which is nyc.gov/onebook. And Commissioner, is that also how people vote for one of these books to do a citywide read on?
Absolutely. They go to the website nyc.gov/onebook, as you said, and please vote. Voting is open all throughout the month of April. And then on May 3rd, we are going to announce the winner. And for the summer months, we're going to be doing events all around the city celebrating the winning book.
Commissioner, thank you. Authors, thank you. Greene Space audience, please thank our amazing guests. Thank you all so much. Good luck to all of you. May the best book win. Brian Lehrer on WNYC, and we'll be right back with the comedian and activist Liz Winstead. Stay tuned.
How do you photograph victims of war as more than just victims?
One of the limitations or the failings of photojournalism is that we so often are pushed to represent people at their most vulnerable and their most distressed.
British war photographer Anastasia Taylor-Lind focuses her lens on survival. That's next time on The Takeaway, weekday afternoons at 3 on 93.9 FM.
WNYC is supported by Swan Galleries, whose auction, The Knowing Eye Photographs and Photo Books on April 19th, offers Dorothea Lange's censored photographs of Japanese internment camps and oratones by Edward Curtis. Catalogs and bidding at swangalleries.com. The Vital Projects Fund and the Museum of Modern Art, where Adrian Piper, A Synthesis of Intuitions, 1965 to 2016, is now on view. More info and tickets at MoMA.org. Join New York Public Radio's Community Advisory Board for a conversation with Jim Schachter, Vice President of News, tomorrow at 6:30 p.m. in the Greene Space. Details at 646-829-4000 or wnyc.org/cab.
If you believe democracy requires a free press, your station is WNYC, 93.9 FM and AM 820, NPR News and the New York Conversation.
Brian Lehrer on WNYC, live in the Greene Space. Want to give a quick mention to another Greene Space event that's coming up. It's a few weeks from now. It's not till Monday, May 14th at 7 o'clock, but our friends at Trump Inc., WNYC's podcast made in partnership with ProPublica about the president and his family's businesses, will be holding a live event with the great Russian-American author Masha Gessen and Tony Schwartz, who was actually sort of the ghostwriter for Trump's The Art of the Deal once upon a time. So our Trump Inc. hosts with Masha Gessen and Tony Schwartz. Get your tickets at wnyc.org/thegreenspace for Monday night, May 14th at 7 o'clock. With us now, Liz Winstead, comedian, writer, co-creator of Comedy Central's The Daily Show, and founder of the Lady Parts Justice League. Liz will be doing her first comedy show in New York in 5 years tonight at the Cutting Room on East 32nd Street. It's a show called The Greatest SH Show on Earth. Hi, Liz. Welcome back to WNYC, and welcome to the Greene Space.
You're in a suit.
I mean,
people need to know.
You know, usually radio, you come in shorts, sweatshirts.
Yeah, or some variation of a WNYC T-shirt.
There you go. Yes. Well,
I don't mean to embarrass you, but like it's jarring to see Brian Lehrer in a suit.
I clean up okay.
You do. You look great.
You had the nerve to name your gig The Greatest Blank Show on Earth, and then asked to come on the radio to talk about a show whose name we're not even allowed to say. That's the premise of your being here today.
I know, and Facebook wouldn't let us post the ad for it either, even when we had all the words, all the letters with asterisks. I called it...
Facebook finally found something that's out of bounds?
I know, it took me 6 times to get the ad on Facebook. I'm like,
I didn't think it would be
literally
you.
Russians are destroying our democracy, and you care about my stupid comedy show in New York? Are you kidding me? Facebook, pull it together.
And this is your first comedy show in New York in 5 years.
Yes.
Where have you been?
I formed a nonprofit, a reproductive rights nonprofit called Lady Parts Justice League. And with all these assaults happening on all of our rights and realizing that it was happening on a state level, and that is really where people need to focus, I got together with a whole bunch of comics and musician friends of mine, and I said, we need to hit the road, and we need to, provide aid and comfort to these clinics that are under siege by protesters and politicians. And then we need to, with our show, have a little talk back afterwards with the providers and with the activists, and have the audience listen to what the needs are and then grow their activist bases. So for the past 5 years, I've been traveling around the country in the Vagical Mystery Tour. Can we say that? I feel like I can't say anything on the show. I'm just one big filth bag.
Is that a
it's
1960s
good.
drug reference?
It's a 1960s drug reference. It has to do with, this is part of the problem, Brian. I said vagical, you thought it was a drug reference, and politicians are the same way. They don't really know how
vagical,
it works.
I missed it. I got it. Now I got it.
Yes.
Apologize.
So I decided to do part of what we do on the road, the comedy. I respond to the world a lot, so I'm doing literally a sort of a snapshot of where we're at right now, because I feel like we could all digest and then regurgitate out a little bit of this with humor, right?
Well, no one saw a raid on Trump's lawyer's office coming. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I don't really call it a raid. I like to call it a Cohenoscopy. Right? Scoping a butthole for bad stuff, right? I mean, I feel like that is what's happening. And it just keeps, this is the problem with doing a show like this, is that I was like putting my show to bed yesterday, and then it was like, oh my God, Sean Hannity is client number 3. Open up my laptop. Sean Hannity's like, really? I just got advice from him on things that had nothing, really. There's 2 other clients who got advice for particular things. And Sean Hannity would like us to believe that he was looking into, I don't know, real estate deals. I don't think so.
Do you know that they have a special team of officials who will sort out attorney-client privilege communications?
You mean the Taint Squad?
Yeah.
Literally called the Taint Squad, and please have Stormy Daniels star in the movie.
One piece of intrigue with Cohen is that the Steele dossier places him in Prague, meeting with a Russian official about the Trump campaign. The McClatchy News Service says investigators have proof he was there, but Cohen flatly denies it. Have you ever been to Prague?
You know, I can't tell you how many times. Actually, I don't know. Have I been to Prague? I guess I can't remember. I mean, and it just escapes me. You know, it was just so tedious going to Prague, and then just that like annoying having to go through the Czech Republic so I didn't have to get my passport stamped. I don't know. I mean, it's like literally the G train going to Prague. I can't remember.
It's
all
remember?
Just a blur. In fact, what's hilarious is that if you've ever met anybody who's gone to Prague, they will not shut up about it, right? People who've gone to Prague, it's like that clock, the clock, the clock, the clock, the clock, shut. Okay, we get it. You traveled to Prague. Good. We all know because we have Instagram.
So you watch Comey on TV.
Oh my God.
What'd you think?
Well, first of all, there's a lot to unpack with Comey, right? I think that like everybody wants to just punch him in the face, like for the most part. Because at first, when he testified, right, he came forward, we were like, oh my God, this is such crazy information. You know, here's this guy testifying before Congress, and he's like 7 feet tall. And he's like, I was terrified of Trump, so terrified I wore a blue suit so I could hide in the curtains. And you're like, that's insane. And then what got me was he actually said, I don't want to be alone with him, so I would bring Jeff Sessions. How creepy is Trump that you want to hang around with Jeff Sessions more than you would actually have to? I feel like that's really bizarre. But now with this book, now it's just like, the whole thing is just, he sounds like a whiner. He sounds like a little snowflake. Like, I just felt like no one liked me. And it was just, I was just trying to, and I thought Hillary was going to be president, but then Trump isn't qualified because he's unstable morally. And it's like, basically, you've just laid out a whole bunch of crazy, like, high school kid who moved to a new school in 11th grade problems. Like, and also, you're head of the FBI, no one likes you.
Maybe.
You're like literally a creepy person who has all of our information at any point. No one's gonna like you. You took the job that nobody likes.
Maybe it's good that someone with so much power has a decent degree of self-doubt and uncertainty about the big decisions he made.
No. Literally, he's like, that is just unbelievably and patently false, because he's literally like, you know, I was working under the assumption that Hillary was going to win. It's like, no, sir, we were operating under that assumption. You knew where the bodies were buried. You knew where every Russian thing was. So he's not like, I better weigh this out. It's like, no, you let some democracy like get thrown under the bus because you felt bad people wouldn't like you.
Did I see a Lady Parts Justice League renaming of the Comey book online this morning?
You may have. I don't know. I didn't do it. Did somebody do a funny thing?
Oh, somebody did a funny thing. Well, I would have to look it up.
Oh my gosh. You mean unplanned presidency?
That's it.
Yes. I was like trying to think. I was like, yes, that's right. I was like, what, did we do something this morning? No, we did that last night. Yes, unplanned presidency. Yes.
Tell everybody more about Lady Parts Justice League.
So I feel really, really passionate that, through my career, I was at The Daily Show and then Air America Radio, and humor really can make a difference for a whole bunch of reasons. It can level the playing field. When you make somebody laugh, it's disarming because it's an involuntary liking of a person, right? And so you can't deny that. So I feel like humor really is good. And when we talk about issues that can be as controversial or as, let's say, access to abortion, to talk about all the landscape of it and to really highlight the people who are the bad actors in it. Using humor to expose them, I think, is really important. And so to have comedians take some of their time to say, we want to go on the road and we want to just even gather people through a comedy show, forget about all of it. If I just bring a whole bunch of really funny people to a city to do a show, I've got 400 captive people in an audience who have a great time at a show, and then they will hear the needs of their community and then sign up. It's really powerful. And so just by doing that, and my show tonight at the Cutting Room is a benefit for Lady Parts Justice League as we embark on our tour. So if you're free tonight in New York City, come on down. It's a wild ride, 90 minutes of just hammering the current state with which we live.
I see that one of the things that Lady Parts Justice League is doing is hashtag expose fake clinics and hashtag end the lies. What lies, what fake clinics?
So for those of you that don't know, since the early 1970s, there has been a rash of their fake women's health centers that have popped up. There's about over 4,000 of them in the United States. They're funded by oftentimes people who have extremist values around premarital sex, abortion, you name it. They are oftentimes, in 9 states, funded by the government. They are solely created to dissuade someone who is looking for access to abortion, and they will often open up right next to an actual provider or across the street. They'll have the same font and name as on the sign. And if you've ever been on a subway or a bus and you see a sign that says like pregnant, need help, free choices, those are those clinics. So they lure people in. They're not run by medical professionals. They're unlicensed. And we want to let people know that these places exist. We want to raise awareness, especially online. So we have been doing an online campaign where you can review these websites of these clinics who are very deceptive. They hide that they don't provide abortion way down into like the pages. So if somebody is looking for access to abortion, at least if one of these places pops up within the comments and the reviews, it will say, if you're looking for abortion, this place doesn't provide it. So we feel like deceiving people, women and pregnant people in their time of need, is something that should be illegal and should be called out. At the very least, you should actually know what medical services you're getting, and you should be getting them by an actual physician.
And so your Twitter includes a call for using direct action to combat fake clinics.
Yes. So we do a couple of things. We do this online campaign where you can get together with your friends. If you go to exposefakeclinics.com, you can click on your state. You can click on where these places are. Look at their website, scour it. Don't be rude or snarky. That's not the point. The point is scour the website, see if they are transparent, that they are places that do not provide all the medical care that somebody might need. We also do sidewalk counseling like they do at abortion providers. We will stand outside their fake clinics with signs that say like no facts given and things like that, and have literature to pass out to the community. We don't harass the people that go in. We tell the community exactly what happens inside the walls of the clinic.
You know that one of the Michael Cohen stories that emerged in the last week is that he was the fixer for a Republican Party official and Trump donor named Elliot Broidy, 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 age 60 and married, who got a Playboy model pregnant, I guess, last year. She had an abortion, and Cohen represented Broidy in facilitating a $1.6 million payment to the woman. Broidy has now resigned from the RNC, and you retweeted David Frum, who said the most militant pro-lifer he knows said that whole story was just matters between consenting adults and not a public issue. I assume your Lady Parts brain disagrees with that?
Well, I feel like isn't that always the way with some of these people? When it happens to me, it's different. When it happens to everybody else, these vaginal crossing guards need to weigh in and legislate. And so that has been sort of the problem with all of it, right? There is no privacy. And $1.6 million. That is a very expensive, even in these days, that is actually 3,200 abortions that low-income women could have gotten for this $1.6 million.
And they only got one.
Which is how I'm sure they'll spin it. You know what? We support him because there was only one abortion. Could have been a lot more. Also, I think they think because Trump, screams Jesus when he has sex, that's fine too. He's one of us.
We have about a minute left. I'm curious how...
We have a minute left. No, you're off the air, my friend.
That's it. After that last comment, you're gone. How easy or hard is it to do comedy in the Trump era compared to before? Because I'm thinking as a non-comedian, on the one hand, there is so much material. On the other, you don't want to diminish the seriousness of it all.
Well, I think it's a couple of things. It comes so fast that it's hard to dissect like big meaty things in a way you used to be able to. There'd be like 25 great news stories if you wanted to do a year in review. Now, each day there's all this new stuff, so you just reposition yourself in a different way. And I think that like every day that we wake up, we need to have humor in our lives. And for me, the most important thing is if you can laugh at a joke about this serious world we're living in, you haven't given up hope. And so every time that I crack a joke and people laugh, I feel like you're still in it, you know? I mean, we're here, and as long as we're here, there needs to be laughter, and I think those of us that observe this owe that to our fellow citizens.
Liz Winstead, her first comedy show in New York in 5 years is tonight
Thank
as a benefit for Lady Parts Justice League at the Cutting Room on East 32nd Street. Show at 7:30. Thanks for stopping by
Thanks
the
for
Greene
having
Space
me.
on your way, and thanks all of you for coming to the Greene Space. Listeners, if you want to attend a future Brian Lehrer Show at the Greene Space, we do this here about once a month. We'll let you know when our May show is. Actually, I already know. It's Tuesday, May 15th. So hope to see you down here one time in the future. And thanks for listening, everybody. Brian Lehrer on WNYC.
WNYC supporters include Japan Society, presenting the first U.S. exhibition dedicated to the large-scale